Hi, this is James O'Keefe, captain of the Massachusetts Pirate Party, and I'm joined today by First Officer Steve. How you doing?
Good evening, Jamie. Thank you.
Great. Unfortunately, Joe will not be able to join us, but we hope he's having a good time kid wrangling and being the dutiful parent that we know he is. So, with that, we have two topics today. The first is, one is Silicon Valley Bank and its collapse last week, and the other one's ChatGPT. So, you want to head us off on ChatGPT there, Steve?
Sure. So ChatGPT is developed, basically it's a language model developed by the OpenAI Institute. The idea is that you can, ask the software, ChatGPT, questions and it'll respond to you. Some of the things that, and it's not just, an information retrieval thing. I gather there have been people who've, asked it to provide summaries of such and such in iambic pentameter, and it'll come up with this. It actually seems rather impressive. But a art there's an article from the Register a couple of weeks ago talked about someone who works in the data privacy field, has degrees in, I think, computer science and um, like one of the social sciences. But he had heard from colleagues that when they asked Chat GPT to describe, you know, you know, it would be like saying, okay, Chat GPT, what do you know about Steve Revelak? I haven't tried this, but I should. I'm kind of curious now. He'd have, some of his colleagues had had the experience where the model just gave back wrong information. And, he's like, okay, decides to try it for himself. Well, the model, based on what it has found on the web or whatnot, um, sort of gave a good summary, an accurate summary of his professional life, but then said that he had died in 2019, which was a little unnerving. The AI tells you that you're dead. And he, proceeded to just follow up with a couple of questions like, how did David Hanf die? And, the AI would say, well, that information wasn't made public, so I can't tell you. Well, how do you know he's dead? Well, because there were obituaries published. Can you send me a link to an obituary? And the OpenGPT provides a link. The link doesn't work, but basically, this is an example of the software just kind of it's. I don't want to personify um, you know a mathematical model, but it's kind of the moral equivalent of um, being caught in a lie or being you know proven wrong and then just trying to dig in your heels. So
So
one
kind of like people, right?
yeah, kind of like people. It's what sort of there's a book from 2016 called Weapons of Math Destruction by an author named Kathy O'Neill, who talked about the growing use of artificial intelligence for for certain language processing tasks like resumes were resume handling was a big one. Sentence, coming up with sentences for criminal violations, that sort of thing. And she talks in her book about it's not always clear. You know people will tend to trust an answer because, hey, this is what the computer said. And sometimes the computers get it wrong in the sense that the models, the biases that we have built into society become built into the models. And one of the challenges there is to get traceability and attribution. Why did the algorithm being able to, have some insight into why an algorithm made a specific decision. And you could also do statistical tests to, see if there are biases. But this is a case where, the, this writer asked the algorithm for attribution, a citation, specifically, can you send a link to my obituary? And the software just made shit up. And, I would have thought that, at least if you build in, you know, attribution and some provenance behind, the decision making, well, that should be accurately reflect what happened. But this is a case where it clearly didn't. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jamie?
I mean, like all human tools, it can be used as a force for good or evil. I don't know. I feel like this is the long sloth of capitalism trying to commodify knowledge. Not that that hasn't been done. Not that that hasn't been going on for the last 100+ years. I mean, it's interesting. Like, I know a few episodes we talked a little about things like Mid-Journey and other tools for generating art, generative art tools.
Mm-hmm.
And, we think about how does a student or anyone learn how to draw or to paint or to photograph or to create some work of art. They look at what has come before them and maybe they try those techniques, or they play around, they experiment, they copy, and then once they're familiar with that methodology, then they can kind of change it and do stuff with it. I remember years ago looking at going to a Picasso exhibit, and it was all of his older stuff. So it wasn't all of the cubism that he did. It was when he was a kid or a teen or a young adult, and they were beautiful. I mean, they were perfect. You could look at his pencil sketches and they looked realistic. And that's something that comes from both copying others, experimenting, and honing your craft. And so, if we had some general artificial intelligence, they would have to learn by looking at what has come before. And so in that regard, that is a useful thing. But the problem is, this is controlled by a corporation. And that corporation is going to use it in ways to potentially remove artists, or to allow someone for a fee to create text that basically says what a copy editor, or not a copy editor, a copywriter might have done for a news website or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So in that sense, I'm wary about it, because this isn't an AI I can talk to as a fellow sentient creature. This is just bunch of computer processors, and many computer processors owned by some faceless corporation that thinks, as Cory Doctorow says, we're the gut flora of its processes, of its profit-making processes. So I'm wary. At the same time, I did see one thing that was useful, which was someone was using it as a learning tool, and they were talking about they were in a class on computer programming and how useful it was for the teacher could kind of operate at this level and wouldn't have to go through the basics, because the basic questions you could ask ChatGPT and it would give you code examples and it would explain the code examples very well. And that's leveraging a tool to do kind of education in a useful way. But, if you're going to say, give me a summary of Abraham Lincoln, and it's like, yeah, he fought the Clone Wars in 2333 and, had 18 kids, all of them, half of them clone and the others artificial intelligence. Literally, if it's going to make stuff like that up, then that's not useful. So,
yeah. Part of me on one level, since I write software for a living and I never cease to be amazed at the silly things that software can do, which is to say, never underestimate the ability of the human being to inject bugs intentionally or not. Sometimes you just have to look at it and say, oh, well, that's funny. Let's fix it.
Yeah, I mean, the big problem with any machine learning is it's a black box. We don't know how it made the decisions that it made. And I believe in the example it talked about, and we're already seeing this now where, you make your resume so it is machine readable. The machine doesn't care if it's beautifully laid out with, a sidebar and great headers, with sans serif font, with text that's all serif font. The computer doesn't care. It's just text to it. And so if you don't put the right buzzwords, then your resume gets discarded. And that's potentially a problem, especially in regards to, if it looks at a resume and there may not be something where it's given information that this person is a person of color or a woman, for example, but it will go through it based on the, garbage in, garbage out, what human beings have been feeding it, and it'll catch their little what quirks that they look for in a negative way, and it'll reproduce the very same racism, sexism, and homophobia that we already see in the society, just at machine speed.
So when when women are paid 72 cents on the dollar compared to their male counterparts, and you put that history as training data into a predictive model, well, guess what the model is going to do?
Right. And unlike I remember one of my labor economics classes, the professor was talking about a case that he had been hired by the person bringing the suit to show that the company was discriminating against women. And he came up with his economic model and ran it through linear regression, and he clearly could tell if you were a man, you got this bonus. If you were a married man, you got another bonus. If you had kids, you got a third bonus. Whereas women didn't necessarily see those increases in salary. Fortunately, all of their, oh yeah, we have to give Joe a raise because he just got married or he had another child, was already written down. So they didn't really need his economic model. But it's, they're not, if it's all in a black box. Yeah, we just followed what the algorithms told us. They said that this person should be promoted. They said that this person should get a raise. We don't know. Then how do you interrogate that? So, like with anything, there are good things and bad. So the other thing also from Silicon Valley was apparently Silicon Valley Bank collapsed. They had assets, from this LA Times article, they had assets of $173 billion. Deposits of $173 billion, of which 42 billion left in the last few days, which is likely to crush most any bank when a good quarter of your deposits leave. But the FDIC has taken them over along with local regulators. But interestingly enough, they only had, and I've heard conflicting numbers on this, but I know from this Los Angeles Times article, 12.5% of deposits, the monetary value of deposits, actually had some form of insurance. And they don't say if that's FDIC insurance, which is limited to, I think, $250,000 per person, or if they had some portion that was FDIC insured, and then they had another portion that used some other private insurance. That is possible. But yeah, a lot of venture capital funds and were invested there. A lot of people in Silicon Valley and even their branches in Massachusetts and elsewhere, they no longer have access to their money until Monday, possibly. And the other thing is that, it's like some of the very people who were upset, some of these tech bros who were upset about Biden's attempt to forgive some of the student debts that are owed to the Department of Education. Never mind private corporations, the Department of Education. We're upset at that, are the very same ones that are like, oh no, we need to make those folks whole. I mean, we learned this in 2008, Yeah. I don't know.
There's I read an article in The Guardian about this, and one of the things, now that the FDIC has taken control of the bank, the next question is, well, what do you do with it now? I guess they're looking for a buyer, but the sort of consensus seems to be that shareholders in the bank, investors in the bank, they are totally going to lose money. The question remains about, what to do with depositors. In one sense, the 250 grand is a decent chunk of money, but I think I'm under the impression that insurance limit has been there at that dollar value for years and years and years, which is to say it ain't worth what it used to be. And
they can always index it for inflation, just like they should index the minimum wage.
And I also gather that, the majority of, or a substantial part of the deposits, that this bank was holding on to were in excess of the insurable amount. So, just kind of projecting out a little bit, to what extent do other banks have customers with over $250,000 in assets? And, is there a possibility that, there could be, people could be nervous about having too much, keeping all the cash in one place, so to speak. I guess we'll find out this week if there will be, to what extent there will be ripple-on effects. But, I seem to the takes I'm reading say this is, nothing like the 2008 financial crisis. It's less severe, and I'm hoping that's right. Sometimes, sometimes you don't see things coming until later on. But yeah, this is another thing to watch, wait and see, and to see to what extent they are able to cover depositors and so on.
I mean, I think for some, like in the 2008 financial crisis, I believe they exceeded the cap in terms of what FDIC would cover. And if I recall correctly, FDIC, in order to provide insurance, the bank has to pay a certain amount of money. It's not like it just comes for free. Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding is the bank, SVB, there had been a lot of deposits in the last few years, and they turned a lot of those into
bonds.
right. Well, mortgage bonds and low interest mortgage bonds, rather than say doing more direct loans. So they just bought bonds. They didn't go and say, "Oh, you want to start a company? We shall loan you money for that purpose." Right. I mean, they probably did some of that, but it's going and maintaining your own loans takes more effort probably than just buying mortgage-backed securities somewhere. Which means higher labor costs because you have to have people to, vet the loans and interact with those who take out the loans and things like that. But I mean, I certainly don't. I feel for the startups and small businesses that had their money at this bank, and it's amazing to me. You see these things around of, oh yeah, we tried to pull our money out. I'm a big VC, and I tried to pull my money out. And it's like, yeah, there's not much of this. This is a wonderful this is a wonderful life in your history, I guess. They weren't back in the bank. They're like, oh, this company is going to go down. I shall try and pull all my money out, which just means that it's more likely to go down.
Yeah.
Right. And crash. Yeah, I mean, outflow of $42 billion. I would have thought they would have been like, geez, it went over like $10 billion or $1 billion. We're just going to we're just going to close offices at the moment and talk with the feds and try and figure it out before they get a huge outflow of money.
Yeah. I also read at some point that they have been without a risk management officer for some period of time, which clearly does not work to their advantage in this situation.
And not only that, but apparently Trump changed the rules. They had put in rules to say banks that banks over a certain size, of which SVB was that size, have to go through and they have to do analysis of the riskiness,
Stress test.
and a stress test basically. And then Trump raised the limit so it only affected a small number of banks, and so there was no regulatory oversight, at least in the set of stress tests, that would have said whether you are vulnerable or not. And apparently, Biden hasn't put those back in place either. So, so with that, thank you very much for listening to us. We hope you found this illuminating. We'll put the links in the description. They're also in the chat log. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover, by all means, please send us an email, info@masspirates.org. We have an upcoming conference in May 13th, and we'll put that up on masspirates.org soon on the conference page, and that'll be in Lowell, and there'll be details there. We hope you'll join us. It'll also be a bit of a grilling cookout, so feel free to bring some food, have a good time chatting with folks. As Steve can attest, you can get there via the public transit and bike. So
multimodal, Matt. Yes, I am Mr. Multimodal Man.
Good for you. So with that, again, check us out at masspirates.org. If you like this, please give us a thumbs up. Do like, share, subscribe, and hope you have a wonderful week. We have a meeting coming up this Thursday. That is a member meeting. Check it out. We'll have a link at masspirates.org. And, if you're interested in building the Pirate Party, please come by. With that, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Jamie.
Hope you have a great time. We are clear.